You were an accident, Sophia. Nobody wanted you here. My sister's icy words echoed in the room, shattering the last illusion I'd held about my family. My name is Sophia Evans. I'm 28 years old, and I've just been cut out of my family's multi-million-dollar inheritance. But what I never expected was that this brutal rejection would lead me straight to a secret my grandfather kept hidden for years. One that would change everything. Before I share the rest of my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you've ever gone above and beyond for family, only to be betrayed. Trust me, you'll want to hear what happened next. The Spanish moss, hanging from Savannah's ancient oaks, looked like mourning veils as I drove through the wrought iron gates of my childhood home. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. Not from grief, but from something I couldn't name yet. Grandfather Charles had been dead for 3 days, and I was just now learning about it. The voicemail from Dad had been brief. The will reading is tomorrow at 2. Don't be late, Sophia. 28 years old, and I still flinched at his tone. I parked my beat-up Honda between Rachel's gleaming Mercedes and Dad's Bentley, the contrast as stark as our relationships had always been. The humid Georgia air clung to my skin as I climbed the marble steps. Inside, they'd already gathered in Grandfather's study. Mom's diamonds caught the afternoon light streaming through tall windows. Dad checked his Rolex. Rachel examined her manicure, perfect as always in her designer suit. They looked up when I entered, and something flickered across their faces. Annoyance? Disappointment? I'd grown used to that look. Finally, Mom said, not bothering with a greeting. Mr. Whitmore has been waiting. The family lawyer sat behind Grandfather's mahogany desk, papers spread before him like tarot cards revealing our fates. I took the only empty chair, the one farthest from my family. Even in death, the seating arrangement spoke volumes. Now that everyone's here, Mr. Whitmore began, adjusting his glasses, we can proceed with the reading of Charles Evans' last will and testament. My throat tightened. Grandfather had been the only one who understood my passion for ecology, who didn't roll his eyes when I talked about watershed preservation or native plant restoration. While my parents pushed Rachel toward law school and social climbing, Grandfather had quietly encouraged my research, slipping me books on environmental science when no one was looking. To my son, Robert Evans, the lawyer read, I leave my collection of rare first editions and the vintage Jaguar. Dad nodded, satisfied. Of course he'd want the books he'd never read and the car he'd never drive. To my daughter-in-law, Margaret Evans, I leave my late wife's jewelry collection, save for the pieces specifically mentioned otherwise. Mom's fingers unconsciously moved to her throat, already imagining the pearls there. To my granddaughter, Rachel Evans, Mr. Whitmore continued, and I saw my sister lean forward slightly. I leave the remainder of my estate, including all financial holdings, investment portfolios, and real estate properties, totaling approximately $10 million. The room erupted. Mom clasped her hands together in delight. Dad actually smiled. A real smile, not the thin-lipped expression he usually wore. Rachel tried to look surprised, but I caught the satisfied curve of her mouth. Well deserved, Dad said, reaching over to squeeze Rachel's shoulder. Grandfather always knew quality when he saw it. My stomach twisted into knots. I stared at the Persian rug, counting the threads in the pattern, trying not to feel the familiar sting of being invisible. Is that all? Mom asked, already standing. There's one more item, Mr. Whitmore said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me, and I saw it then, they'd forgotten I was even in the room. The realization hit like ice water. They'd actually forgotten their other daughter existed. Oh, Rachel said, her voice dripping false sympathy. Poor Sophie. Well, you always said money didn't matter, right? All those speeches about saving the planet? She laughed, a tinkling sound like breaking glass. Guess you'll have to go earn your own way, won't you? Put all that tree-hugging education to use. Rachel, Mom chided, but her heart wasn't in it. She was already eyeing her new jewelry. Dad stood, straightening his tie. It's for the best, Sophia. Grandfather understood that some people are meant for different things. You never did fit the Evans mold. The words shouldn't have hurt. I'd heard variations of them my whole life. But sitting in Grandfather's study, surrounded by the books we'd read together, breathing air that still smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco, Something inside me cracked. However, Mr. Whitmore's voice cut through their celebration. There is a sealed letter for Miss Sophia Evans, to be opened privately. He held out a cream envelope with my name in grandfather's shaking script. My family's chatter died. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Dad's jaw tightened. A letter? Mom's voice went sharp. What kind of letter? I'm not at liberty to discuss its contents, the lawyer said firmly. It's a private communication. I took the envelope with numb fingers. The paper felt warm, as if grandfather had just finished writing it. Outside, I sat in my car for 20 minutes before opening the letter. My hands shook as I broke the wax seal, grandfather's personal mark, the one he'd used on all his research papers. My dearest Sophia, if you're reading this, then the charade is complete. By now, your family has shown their true colors and you've heard their verdict on your worth. Let them have their moment. What I leave you cannot be measured in dollars. Go to the old farmhouse on Tybee Island. You remember, where we collected ghost crab shells, that summer you turned 12. In the barn, beneath the loose floorboard near the eastern wall, you'll find what you need. The truth has been waiting for you. Trust no one but Eleanor, she's been waiting too. All my love, Grandfather Charles. Eleanor, my grandmother. The woman my parents told me had dementia, who couldn't have visitors, who didn't even remember she had grandchildren. My chest tightened with sudden dread. I drove to Tybee Island as the sun began to set, painting the marshlands in shades of gold and amber. The farmhouse stood exactly as I remembered, weathered silver by salt air, surrounded by saw palmettos and resurrection ferns. But it wasn't abandoned. Smoke rose from the chimney, gardens bloomed where I remembered only sand. The barn door creaked as I pushed it open. Dust motes danced in the fading light. I found the loose board easily. My initials were carved into the wood, a secret grandfather and I had shared. Beneath it lay a metal box containing documents, photographs, and a set of keys. The photographs stopped my heart. Grandfather and me at various ages, but recent ones too. Pictures I'd never seen. Pictures from last year, 2 years ago. Pictures where he looked sick, frail. Pictures I should have been in, would have been in if I'd known. I knew you'd come. I spun around. A woman stood in the barn doorway, silhouetted against the sunset. As she stepped forward, I gasped. Grandmother Eleanor, very much alive, very much aware, and very much angry. Don't look so shocked, child, she said, her voice steel wrapped in silk. Though I suppose you have every right to be. How long did they tell you I was indisposed? How many years of lies? They said you had dementia, that you were in a facility. Her laugh was bitter. Oh, I'm sure they did. Just like they told me you were too busy to visit, too important with your California research to come home. Imagine my surprise when Charles discovered you'd been living in Atlanta for 3 years, practically begging for scraps of their attention. My legs gave out. I sank onto an overturned crate, the metal box clutched in my lap. I don't understand. Eleanor's face softened slightly. She pulled up another crate and sat across from me. Your grandfather and I separated years ago. Not divorced. Just separated. He stayed in the Savannah house to keep an eye on things. I moved out here. We thought it was temporary, just until your parents grew up, I suppose. Learned to be human. She reached for the box, pulling out a phone I recognized as grandfather's old flip phone. He saved everything, you know. Every message he sent you that went unanswered. Every call that never connected. I took the phone with trembling hands and scrolled through the outbox. Dozens of messages. Sophie, my star, are you well? The herons have returned to the marsh. Made me think of you. Your grandmother misses you terribly. When can you visit? I'm not feeling well, sweetheart. Please call. Sophie, are you there? I never. My voice cracked. I never got any of these. Of course you didn't. Eleanor's voice was hard now. Your parents made sure of that. Changed your number in his phone to a dead line, told him you'd cut contact, told you we were indisposed. Quite the elaborate production, really. The truth hit me like a physical blow. All those years of begging for invitations home, of being told grandfather was too busy with the estate, or grandmother couldn't handle visitors. All those holidays spent alone in my apartment, thinking I wasn't wanted. But why? The word came out as a whisper. Eleanor studied me for a long moment. Look in the box again. Look at the documents. I did. Research facility deeds, patent papers, investment accounts. All in my name, dated years ago. Charles knew what they were from the beginning, Eleanor said. Saw how they treated you versus Rachel. You challenged them, asked questions, had your own dreams. Rachel was malleable, easy to control, the perfect Evans heir, beautiful, shallow, and obedient. So they cut me out? They tried, but Charles was smarter. He built this for you, a fully funded research facility focused on coastal rehabilitation, enough money to run it for decades. He knew that's what you'd want, not cash to spend on cars and clothes. I stayed with Eleanor that night. She made me tea with honey the same way grandfather used to, and we talked until dawn. She showed me letters my parents had written, lies upon lies, creating an elaborate wall between us. By morning, I knew what I had to do. The drive back to Savannah felt different. The moss-draped oaks no longer looked mournful but defiant, surviving centuries of storms. I called Mr. Whitmore and arranged a family meeting for that afternoon. They were all there when I arrived, Mom, Dad, Rachel, and their lawyer. Rachel was already spending her inheritance in her mind, talking about a new condo in Buckhead, a shopping trip to Paris. "What's this about?" Dad demanded when I walked in with Mr. Whitmore and a briefcase full of evidence. I didn't sit. Instead, I stood at the head of the table where grandfather used to stand. "It's about the truth." One by one, I laid out the evidence, the phone records, the letters, the lies they'd told to keep grandfather and Eleanor away from me and me from them. Rachel's face went from smug to shocked to furious. Mom clutched her pearls. Dad's face turned an alarming shade of red. "You can't prove anything," he said, but his voice shook. "Actually, I can." I pulled out the final document. Grandfather's real will, the one Mr. Whitmore had kept sealed. "Grandfather knew what you did. He documented everything, and he made provisions." Mr. Seth Whitmore cleared his throat. "The $10 million left to Rachel comes with conditions. Any attempt to contest Sophia's inheritance, any continued harassment or defamation, and the money reverts to the Evans Environmental Trust, with Sophia as sole executor." "You little," Rachel started, but Dad grabbed her arm. "Furthermore," the lawyer continued, "Charles Evans left detailed instructions about the research facility, the patents, and the additional $20 million in funding for the coastal preservation project, all to Sophia." The room exploded. Rachel screamed about fairness, about how she'd done everything right. Mom wailed about reputation. Dad threatened lawsuits. But I just stood there, feeling strangely calm. For the first time in my life, I wasn't begging for their approval. I wasn't shrinking myself to fit their mold. "I'm not going to take Rachel's money," I said quietly, and the room went silent. "She can have it, but in exchange I want you all to sign this." I pushed forward a document. "You'll cease all contact with me. No calls, no visits, no showing up at my work. You'll stop telling people I'm your daughter, since that's clearly what you've wanted all along." Rachel laughed, harsh and bitter. "You think you're so noble, don't you? So much better than us?" Her perfect composure finally cracked. "You want to know the truth? The real truth?" "Rachel," Mom warned. "No." Rachel slammed her hands on the table. "She should know. You were the accident, Sophia. The mistake that came too late. They already had their perfect daughter. They didn't want another one, especially not one who asked questions and refused to play along." The words should have destroyed me. A month ago they would have. But standing there I realized something had shifted. Their rejection no longer defined me. "I know," I said simply. "I've always known. The difference is, I don't care anymore." Dad stood slowly. "You'll regret this. Family is everything." "No," I said, meeting his eyes. "Love is everything. And this isn't love. This is ownership. This is control. This is you being furious that grandfather saw me as a person instead of a disappointment." I turned to Rachel. "And you got everything you wanted, the money, the attention, their approval. But what happens when you realize it's all conditional? When you step out of line? When you dare to be human?" For just a moment something flickered in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or recognition. Then it was gone, replaced by her usual cold smile. "I'll never find out," she said, "because unlike you I know how to play the game." "Then I pity you," I said, and meant it. I signed the papers, cutting ties, and walked out. Behind me I heard Mom crying, not for losing a daughter, but for how this would look to her society friends. Dad was already on the phone with another lawyer. Rachel just sat there, staring at her manicured nails. In the parking lot, Eleanor waited by my car. How do you feel? She asked. I thought about it. Like I've been holding my breath for 28 years and just remembered how to exhale. She smiled. Grandfather's smile. Good. Now let's go build something worth leaving behind. 6 months later, the Evans Coastal Research Center opened its doors. Built on 50 acres of protected wetlands, it was everything Grandfather had dreamed of. Solar panels on every roof, native plant gardens creating habitats for local wildlife, state-of-the-art labs for studying barrier island erosion and marsh rehabilitation. Eleanor moved into the director's cottage with me. Every morning we had coffee on the porch, watching herons fish in the tidal creeks. She told me stories about Grandfather I'd never heard, how he'd fought the family to study science instead of law, how he'd met her during a research expedition, how my birth had given him hope that someone in the family would carry on his real legacy. The center attracted young researchers from around the world. We offered grants, not based on pedigree or connections, but on passion and potential. I remembered what it felt like to be dismissed for caring too much, for dreaming too big. Here, those were qualifications, not flaws. The irony wasn't lost on me. My family had given Rachel $10 million. Grandfather had given me purpose. Looking back, I wouldn't trade. But the universe has a strange sense of humor. 8 months after the center opened, I found someone sitting on the dock at sunset, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Rachel, she looked nothing like the polished princess from the will reading. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her perfect makeup smeared. When she saw me, she flinched. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'll go. Stay, I heard myself say. We sat in silence as the sun painted the marsh gold and crimson. Finally, she spoke. They cut me off, said I was getting too independent, too many opinions. She laughed bitterly. I suggested we should support your center. Good PR, you know? Dad said I was going soft, said if I couldn't remember my place, I could find somewhere else to live. So you came here? I didn't know where else to go. She looked at me then, really looked at me, maybe for the first time. How did you do it? How did you survive being nobody to them? I stopped trying to be somebody to them, I said, started trying to be somebody to myself. Rachel stayed. Not in the house. She wasn't ready for that, and neither was I. But she rented a small apartment in town and started volunteering at the center. She was terrible at first, complaining about the heat, the bugs, the dirty work, but she kept coming back. Slowly, I watched my sister discover who she was underneath the performance. She had a gift for grant writing, it turned out. All those years of crafting the perfect image translated well to crafting the perfect proposal. She raised $3 million in her first year. Mom and Dad never contacted either of us. We heard through the Savannah grapevine that they told people we'd both moved abroad. It was easier than explaining how they'd lost both daughters. One to independence, one to insignificance. 2 years after the center opened, we won the National Environmental Excellence Award. Eleanor and I flew to D.C. for the ceremony. As I stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of faces, I thought about that day in Grandfather's study when they'd told me to go earn my own way. This center, I said into the microphone, exists because someone believed that passion matters more than pedigree, that the work of our hands and hearts means more than the names we inherit. Charles Evans was my grandfather, but more than that, he was my teacher. He taught me that real wealth isn't measured in dollars, it's measured in the positive change we create in the. The applause was warm, genuine. In the front row, Eleanor wiped away tears. Beside her, Rachel clapped until her hands must have hurt. After the ceremony, a letter waited at our hotel. My name was written in Mom's careful script. Rachel had one too. We looked at each other, then, without a word, dropped them in the lobby trash unopened. Some bridges once burned don't need rebuilding. Flying home to Savannah, I pressed my face to the airplane window, watching the coast appear below. The marshes and islands I'd learned to love, not despite my family's scorn, but because of Grandfather's encouragement. The research center was just a speck from this height, but I knew that down there, students were learning, ecosystems were healing, and dreams were taking root in coastal soil. Thank you, Rachel said quietly beside me. For what? For showing me that there's more than one way to earn your own life. Eleanor reached across the aisle and squeezed both our hands. Charles would be so proud, she said, of both of you. As we descended toward Savannah, toward home, I realized she was right, but more importantly, I was proud of myself. I'd been told to go earn my own way, and I had, not in spite of losing my family's approval, but because of it. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as rejections. Sometimes being cast out is really being set free. The plane touched down as the sun set over the marshlands, painting everything gold. Through the window, I could see the Spanish moss swaying in the evening breeze, no longer looking like mourning veils but like nature's celebration banners welcoming us home. If you've ever felt invisible, rejected, or abandoned by the very people who were supposed to love you most, remember this. Sometimes being cast aside is the universe's way of setting you free to become your true self. Never shrink your worth to fit someone else's expectations. Live authentically, chase your passion, and build a legacy you're proud of. Do you have the courage to step out of someone else's shadow? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe to join a community built on inspiring stories like yours.